Hello friends, and welcome back to the channel. Today on Behr Builds Bikes, we're going to be building an SE Bikes Mike Buff Fast Ripper. This one is a multi-speed disc brake 29er. These are very coveted and everyone seems to want one. We're going to get it out of the box, we're going to get her up into the stand, and we're going to do the full assembly. We're going to show you as many of the details as we can without getting into the extraneous unpacking and all that. We'll just fast forward like we usually do in all the other videos. So I hope that you'll enjoy watching this video. I hope you'll learn something, and I hope you'll like, share, and subscribe. Let's get started. So as usual, we're going to get her out of the box and get her up into the stand. First things first, we're going to go ahead and rip the box open. I've had lots of comments asking me about why I'm not using the razor knife. Well, we're going to do this in a way that anyone can do it. We don't want to worry about having any of the problems that can occur by slicing into one of these tires. So first, we're going to size our stand to the post, which we're pretty much there. Then we're going to get the rest of the bikes out. And get our parts box. Now we're going to cut the wheel off the frame, cutting the zip ties. Always throwing our plastic in the recycling. Take our wheel off. Cardboard back in the box. We do have a zip tie on this side, holding on the protective foam. And we have a few extra pieces on there. Set this aside. We're going to grease our seat tube. And we'll get our post into the frame. Can adjust our clamp, tightening down the bolt. We want to make sure that it's going to support the weight of the bike when we do put her up into the stand. So we want it pretty tight. And we will spin her around, get her up in, and lock it down. So from here, we'll go through the unpacking, fast forward like we usually do, get everything off of it and get it ready for the assembly, take the parts out of the box, and I'll see you guys on the other side. All right, so there are not a lot of components that have to go onto this bike. We are going to put the pedals on, we're going to put the handlebars in the stem. You do want to be a little bit careful because these are hydraulic brakes. We do have to route the cable going down on the side of the fork. We'll have to use some zip ties. Some of these don't come with all the fasteners that we're going to need, but essentially we'll adjust the gears, we'll make sure the brakes are all lined up properly. We're going to inflate our tires. It shouldn't take very long to get this bike fully assembled. We do have our pedals from the parts box. We will take them and unwrap them. We are going to grease the spindles as we usually do. They do have a marking on the end of the spindle that shows you the R for right and the L for left. We start our pedals by hand, clockwise motion, get that pedal started, get the thread started. We want it to mate properly and not cross thread. And once we have it started, we take our 15mm pedal wrench and we pedal the bike in reverse to set the pedals. Now this is pretty standard stuff. We do this on all the bikes. Make sure these pedals are locked down really well. You can use the chain itself with the rear wheel to help hold it in place. We do have a few reflector brackets. We're going to loosen up our stem bolts. I'm going to bring the camera a little closer so you can see exactly how I do this and set everything in place. Everything is kind of temporary at first. We're not going to put the caliper, with the rotor until everything is pretty much where it needs to be. So let me move the camera and we'll get a better view of this stem. All right, so with our 6mm Allen wrench, we're going to loosen up the cap bolts that are on here. You have to be kind of careful. Sometimes these are overly tight. In this case, they seem to be relatively well assembled. We're going to take this whole cap right off. This is why I like to use the three-way, because it actually has a little spin to it. We'll just set that aside. We're going to take our handlebar and we're going to make sure that it is configured properly with the cables coming out of the frame and wrapping around to the front. Now I can lay it down to be able to put the cap back on. Let gravity do its work for you. And we will slowly get these nice and evenly tightened. We want to make sure that the gap in the stem cap is equal front and back so that it has maximum clamping force down on these handlebars. You don't want these bars being able to move once the rider is on the bike. And we're only going to get these just snug and make sure that our gap is about the same. Then we're going to switch tools and move to the long-handled 6mm. We're going to bring our bars up to where we want them. Generally, I like to have the angle of the bars in line with the fork. We're not going to be able to make sure that it's straight yet, but if we can get to the bolts front and back of the crossbar, that's pretty much the best way to set it. We're going to tighten these down just a little bit. We don't need to torque them yet because once it's on the floor, then we'll do our final adjustments. This is just basic assembly at this point, getting everything dialed in. Now our caliper, there's going to be bolts that came out of the part box. We're going to have to take them out of the bag. And we have two mounting bolts. Our cable is going to route around the outside of the fork. As you can see here, we do have our mounting hardware. We do have a block inside that keeps the pads from crushing together, because if they do get crushed, you're not going to be able to get them back apart easily. All right, so as you can see, there are two holes in the actual mount that are going to line up with the holes in the fork. We're going to start our bolts by hand. Just get everything started. We're not going to grease these bolts. We actually have a little bit of Loctite on these threads from the factory. We'll take another 6mm, or this one's a 5mm, and we will snug these down if I don't drop the tools. Now we're going kind of rapid fire on this because, like I said, there's not really a lot to these assemblies. These bikes are very well made. They are very expensive. This one, I believe on the website retails for just over $1,300. Well worth it because of the different components that are on it. We're going to find ourselves some zip ties to be able to lock down our hydraulic cable to the mounts on the fork. I shall grab those now. All right, so we're going to take and thread our zip tie through the holder itself, wrap it around the cable, the hose. We can do the same thing up here. And you notice I'm not tightening this down yet. We're going to leave the tails on it and everything until we get everything configured. We've left the caliper loose so that we can make the adjustments we need to. We don't want to damage the rotor. We are going to loosen up these bolts. These are very stout bolts that are on here. It does have the little lawyer tabs. I'm sure you can see that here, that have the little notches on them. So we will feed this gently into the frame, making sure that our lawyer tabs go into the hole. They're just going to help hold it in place. Same on this side. And for this, we're going to use a 15mm socket. I'm leaving it on the extension. I'm not going to need it for the rear. Usually I use this for axle pegs, but because there's such tight tolerances between the bolts, actually this is a 17mm, so we're going to put a 17 on here. We're going to make sure that our wheel is centered in the fork. We can grab the spokes and pull over on the wheel a little bit, make sure it's centered. And then we really want to lock this axle down so that it doesn't move side to side, like so. Now from here, we'll adjust our brake caliper. The way we do this that works the best is with a 5mm long handle, and we're going to actually squeeze the brake so that it actually centers on the rotor itself. And just enough to hold it in place so we can test it. You can hear it rub. We're going to get and look through the caliper to find out exactly where it's holding best and lining up. You can always use a flashlight to be able to look through and see where it's touching the brake pads. And always be very careful when you're dealing with a spinning rotor. These things can slice you wide open. So as you can see, the rotor is not touching the pads in the brake caliper. We're going to make sure that that whole caliper assembly on the back here is nice and tight. And with that, we're going to use our 5mm. We're going to tighten down these holding bolts the rest of the way, and then we're going to trim off these zip ties. Now they do come with these little plastic clips that you can use instead, but they always pop off and the kids lose them anyway. So the zip tie seems to be the way to go. Get it tight, cut it off. And now we'll move to the rear of the bike. All right, so we've loosened up the holding bolts so that the caliper will move back and forth. We will squeeze the brake lever, which will hopefully give us some centering, and just get these to where they bind a little bit, not completely holding it locked down. And then we will make our adjustments till we don't hear any more noise. Hydraulic brakes are very temperamental when it comes to the adjustments. You definitely want to get them dialed in. You want the pads to be able to wear evenly, and you want the best stopping power. So we'll lock those down. We can shine a light through the caliper. And you can see that they're not touching the pads on either side, and that it locks solid. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to make sure that our gears work all the way through the full range. For that, we'll back the camera up a little bit and do this whilst we're in action here. Usually I don't do that, but so now we're going to adjust from the 10th gear all the way to first, one click at a time. Each click should represent one gear change. Now this is the SRAM GX shifting system. There is no adjuster on the derailleur itself as far as cable tension. That takes place up at the shifter itself. There's an adjuster barrel up there. So as we drop down through the gears, we should get 1 gear per click all the way back down. If it's not climbing up into the gear, add more tension to the cable up at the shifter. I'll show you that in a second. And then the same way going back up in reverse. If it's not climbing back up each gear, then you're going to have to add more tension to climb, release the tension if it's not dropping. So your cable adjustment barrel is here. This is what's going to counterclockwise add tension to the cable, or clockwise let the cable tension relax a little bit so that you can adjust your gears in the back. This does have the Tektro hydraulics front and rear and the SRAM GX G10 shifting system on it. So now we're going to make sure that our tires are properly inflated. These particular thick slicks will go up to 65 PSI, which is a pretty firm tire. We will check these with a gauge before we put her on the floor. And with most SE bikes, they do come with some nice billet caps instead of just the regular plastic ones. So we'll put those on so that the dress-up kit is complete. Inflate our tire and put on our billet cap. This is all pretty rudimentary stuff. We do have to assemble our reflectors. You see the bracket has a pitch to it, and there's a little divot in the back of the reflector. That's going to line up with that hole. So you want to slide it in and push it down till it clicks. Then this will actually go on the seat post. We have the same thing for the front. You have your little slot. Pop that right in, and it'll go down there. Now there's a couple of screws that'll hold those in place. That's where we're going to get our Phillips head screwdriver. And we're going to start our screw. You notice it's facing backwards right now. That's till I get it on the floor and can make sure that the seat is adjusted at the right angle. And I'm not going to super torque it down. I'm just going to get it to where it's snug and it still moves. And we'll do the same thing to the front. Now these particular bikes don't come with a pad set like some of the other SE bikes, but they do come with a little sticker pack. Which has some pretty cool stuff on there, and you can dress up the bike even more. So from here, we've got all the parts on her. We're going to set her down. We're going to make sure that the handlebars are aligned. We're going to tighten down the clamp bolts. That'll help that. We do have proper tension already. We'll make sure that the seat is at the right angle, and we'll take her for a ride. And this one is pretty much ready to go. Like I said, not a lot to putting these together, just having to take care of some details. The hydraulic brakes are very tight tolerances, but quite a bit of quality. So hopefully you've enjoyed watching. Hopefully you'll like, share, and subscribe. Share it with your friends. Tell them what you saw. Let them know that this bike is available at Lee's Bicycles at 1101 North Federal Highway in Hollywood, Florida, 33020. You can call us at any time. Our number is 954-925-5157. So as you can see, the bike doesn't have a pad set that goes with it. Our reflectors are on. Our handlebars are on. We're going to get her down onto the floor. We're going to make sure that our handlebar angle is in line with the front wheel. We're going to tighten down our clamp bolts after making sure that our tension is good. Of course, you're hearing the tire on the floor. We're going to go back with all of our tools and make sure that every bolt on here is nice and tight. The shifter holding bolts, the brake lever bolts. Make sure everything is good and tight. This, these bikes take a lot of abuse. The kids like to really wheelie them around. So if everything is tight, you should never have a problem. Turn our reflector around. Seat angle seems pretty good. Drop our seat down. Lock the clamp. Test our brakes. This bike is pretty much ready to go. If you'd like to pick one up for yourself, we have them at 1101 North Federal Highway in Hollywood, Florida. Our number there is 954-925-5157. That's Lee's Bicycles, Lee's Locksmith and Bicycles. Thank you for watching the Behr Builds Bikes version of this particular assembly. I hope you've learned something from it. I hope you'll share, like, subscribe, you know, all the usual YouTube stuff. And I hope to see you in the next one. Have a great day.